Tonight, from Boston, The Advocate. William Rusher, guest advocate Jack Cole, and the moderator Michael Dukakis.
Good evening and welcome to The Advocates. Every week at this time, we look at an important public issue in terms of a practical choice. Tonight, our question involves the treatment of drug addicts, and specifically, that question is this: should Congress enact a national involuntary commitment program for narcotics addicts? Advocate William Rusher says yes.
Between 250,000 million Americans are helplessly addicted to narcotics. To support their habit, they have become the biggest and fastest growing group of criminals and potential criminals in this country. New York and California already have state laws requiring these people to submit to treatment whether they want to or not. Tonight, for the sake of both society and the addict, we ask your support for a federal law to the same effect that will apply to all 50 states. With me is the man who introduced such a bill, Congressman Lou Frey of Florida, as well as Jim Germano, a former narcotics addict, and Mr. Roland Wood, the superintendent of the California Rehabilitation Center.
Guest advocate Jack Cole says no.
Civil commitment, the title of Congressman Frey's bill, has a nice medical ring to it. But let's face it, it means incarceration. It means locks and bars and guards. And it doesn't work. With me tonight are Mr. Neil Chayad, a very distinguished member of the bar, former professor of law at Boston University. Mr. Pleasant Harris, formerly a heroin addict himself, now helping others to get out of that condition. And the director of this state's Massachusetts Drug Rehabilitation Program, Dr. Matthew Dumont.
Thank you, gentlemen. Before we begin, let me say that our guest advocate tonight, Jack Cole, is one of Boston's top television newsmen with WBZ Television, a Westinghouse station. And now for some background on tonight's question. President Nixon, in June of this year, labeled drug abuse public enemy number one. He may have been spurred by evidence of growing use of drugs by our servicemen in Vietnam. But the fact is that drug use is an everyday feature of metropolitan and suburban America. To meet the problem, the administration has moved vigorously to try to stop the flow of illegal drugs from abroad. But the critical problem remains of what to do to prevent the further spread of drug use here at home, and in particular, what to do about perhaps 500,000 Americans who are now narcotics addicts. In Congress, Florida's Representative Frey has introduced a comprehensive bill aimed at treating and ultimately curing narcotics addicts. The bill does provide funds for the study of the causes and effects of drugs, provides funds for research into non-addictive substitutes for dangerous drugs. It would establish a drug training institute for judges and probation officers and provide additional funds for the education of doctors and teachers and caseworkers. But the cornerstone of the Frey bill is the establishment of a national program of involuntary civil commitment of drug addicts, simply because they are addicts, whether criminal or not. If enacted, the Frey bill would allow an addict who has been certified to be committed, even though he has not been charged with a crime or convicted of a crime, to be committed for treatment on the petition of a relative or a law enforcement officer or a health official. True procedural safeguards are provided, mainly to assure that the finding of addiction is well-founded. But once that finding has been made, that addict can then be confined for a period of up to 6 months and placed under additional supervision for a period of up to 3 years. The Frey bill does make provision for the treatment of criminal addicts as well. But tonight, we will be concentrating on those provisions of the bill which establish a program of involuntary commitment of addicts who have never been charged with a crime or, if charged, have not been convicted and are awaiting trial. As a further point of clarification, it is important to understand that the very fact of being an addict is not a crime in itself, nor constitutionally can it be made one. And now to the cases. Mr. Rusher, why should Congress enact a national program of involuntary civil commitment for narcotics addicts?
Most Americans do not, I think, need to be convinced that drug addiction, and tonight we are talking about hard drugs, not pot, is a desperately serious problem in our country today. As Mr. Dukakis has said, there are literally hundreds of thousands of addicts, and thanks to their missionary work, the number is growing every year. The states and the federal government are doing the best they can to stem the tide by trying to cut off the supply from abroad, by prosecuting the distributors here, and by persuading the addicts themselves to submit to treatment. But the vast majority of these desperately sick and desperately dangerous people are in no position to help themselves. They don't want to get well. If the truth were told, they don't want to live. They want to die in the arms of the drug that has enslaved them. Meanwhile, to support their habit, 95% of them sooner or later turn to crime, first by selling hard drugs to each other and to other people, and then by committing burglary, robbery, and other crimes. New York and California have already done what clearly must be done: pass laws requiring drug addicts to submit to treatment whether they want to submit or not. The treatment doesn't always work, but it works far, far better than no treatment at all. I might add that it costs far, far less. What is obviously needed, however, is a federal law that will make commitment of drug addicts compulsory in all 50 states rather than in just 2. One such bill is already before Congress, and I will call first upon the man who introduced it, Congressman Lou Frey of Orlando, Florida.
Welcome to the Advocates, Congressman Frey.
Congressman Frey, why is your bill necessary? Who will it help?
Mr. Usher, will help 2 segments, we might say, in our society. 1, the individual addict himself who won't help himself, we know. 2, society. We have between 250,000 and 500,000 hardcore heroin addicts in this country. The cost in terms of property itself is well over $8 billion. And you tell me what cost you put on the human life of a young person who's been destroyed by this drug. So the costs are many, not only to the individual, but to society as a whole.
But your bill, as I understand it, proposes involuntary commitment of addicts. Why can't this be handled by a voluntary route? Why can't we get the addicts themselves to submit to treatment?
We spent a great deal of time looking into this, and I think personally initially I was drawn towards this because we hoped that this would work. But it hasn't been the answer. For instance, in the federal program between 1935 and the act that was passed in 1966, 70% of the people who went into the voluntary programs busted out. In other words, when the going got tough, they walked out. We know whether it's in California or throughout this country, less than 10 to 15% of the people were in voluntary programs. Talked to many of these kids who've been busted. Said to them, look, how can we help you? What can we do? So many of them said, look, I wish you'd have gotten me before I did get arrested, before I got myself in trouble. I needed the help, but I couldn't get to it.
But, Congressman, I know that you yourself have been worried about the risk to the civil liberties of addicts who haven't committed crimes. How have you protected against dangers to their civil liberties in your bill?
I think one thing we got to understand at first, and I think the word was misused before, we're not talking of confinement, we're talking of commitment. That doesn't mean that you're going to put somebody necessarily in a rehabilitation center behind bars. It does mean you have the flexibility with the heroin addict to do with him as he happens to be treated. In other words, he can go, for instance, to a halfway house. He can go on a parole status, on an outpatient status where he can check in, or he can go to a medical facility where he can be helped. We've required in the bill, for instance, counsel, a jury trial. We've required that the treatment be done in 72 hours, including a physical examination. We've tried to do...
The original diagnosis.
The original diagnosis, yes.
Is your bill, then, really the best way of dealing with heroin addiction, or is there some other?
Well, Mr. Usher, I wish I knew another way. We've certainly searched our souls for this kind of thing. What we've tried to do is set up a broad outline of how we can handle this problem. We know that we have to, in many cases, apply external motivation. These heroin addicts have to be motivated to help themselves. Furthermore, we need the flexibility. You can't talk in generalities about a heroin addict. Each one is different. The young addict who first time has been addicted, he should be treated different than the person who's been 3 or 4 times maybe addicted. You need methadone maybe for some. You need inpatient care for others. But you need the flexibility on this to help the addict and at the same time to help society.
Congressman Frey, Cole has some questions for you.
Indeed, sir. And if you'll bear with me for just a moment, Congressman, I have a little trouble with some of your statistics, sir. You have said, and you said again here tonight, in a speech before the National Society of State Legislators just a couple of weeks ago, the number of addicts has been estimated at being between 250,000 and 500,000. You've said further an addict may need $50 to $150 a day, and that he thus must steal 5 times that worth in goods to support his habit. Now, I've done a little simple arithmetic, sir, and averaging your figures, not the lowest nor the highest, but exactly halfway between, I come up with 375,000 addicts times $100 a day, times 5, times the number of days in a year. And that means that $68,437,500,000 worth of goods is stolen every year in this country to pay for heroin. Do you really think that's the case?
That's the outside figure. I think all the figures you'll see and the figures I've used in my report are accurate. We estimate in the congressional reports to about 8.1 billion is probably the figure as best that we can see. And I think if you'll check, you'll find practically everybody is in that ballpark, either the low end or the high end.
Well, I don't quite understand how we go from the arithmetic, unless I've multiplied incorrectly, to only 8.1 billion, but passing beyond that for a time, you say further in the same speech, 98% of the addicts in New York City resort to crime to support their habit. How do you know that, sir?
That was a report from the Attorney General's office of New York City.
Yes, sir, but how do you suppose they compiled those statistics?
I wasn't in the Attorney General's office. I do know a little bit more about the Washington statistics, which pretty much bear those out. That was done basically on interviews with the police, with people in jail, to break down where their crime, where the money came from to support them.
Well, sir, isn't it so that virtually all of the addicts whom the law knows about are addicts with whom the law has come in contact?
Certainly.
Well, wouldn't that tend to support sort of assuming one's own conclusion that therefore all addicts are engaged in criminal activity?
No, I think there's enough of them that we can get a good sampling. There's been several other scientific methods of breaking this out on a statistical basis, and if you've read these reports, which I assume you have, you'll find that it holds up.
Congressman, let's go to the matter of principle behind this bill. You're a distinguished lawyer, sir. And I want to quote to you something that John Stuart Mill said. He said, "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not sufficient warrant." Would you agree with that?
Well, I suppose not necessarily. What about the law against suicide?
Well, I suppose that Mr. Mill, for our purposes, would disagree that there ought to be a law against suicide.
I
at
think
least there ought not be a capital offense.
My answer obviously is the law today doesn't follow exactly what Mr. Mills does, and including the Supreme Court.
Well, would you agree to this extent that we ought to be very careful about instances in which we lock people away for their own good?
Yeah, you're talking again about locking him away. You seem to be hung up on this thing. We're not necessarily talking about locking him away in this bill, but certainly you should, and I think that's one of the reasons Please let me answer my question.
Yes, sir.
That's why I've approached this very cautiously, frankly, and over a period of time to come to this thing. You know, we're dealing in a situation where not only is somebody committing suicide, you know, but they got a ring or a string around about 8 other guys going over the bridge with them. And I am very cautious, but I think this is one of the greatest problems in our country. And as I said, what's the alternative? I don't see any other way to handle it.
Congressman, would you agree in principle that if we could identify by statistics a segment of the population who are more likely than any other segment to commit crimes against persons, against property, we ought to lock those people away for a period of, shall we call it, pre-correction and then let them out?
This will have to be a very short answer, Congressman.
No.
What do you see as the difference?
That's short enough?
Isn't that what we're doing here, sir?
No, it isn't what we're doing here. We've got an entirely different situation here that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a two-pronged thing, as I said. The individual who himself is an addict, who can't help himself, who's killing himself, whose lifespan is shortened to about 29 years, for instance, in New York, and a person himself who is just, in essence, hurting people in society.
Gentlemen, we have a basic difference of opinion here. I'm sorry, Congressman Frey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Rusher.
Now let us hear directly from a person who has suffered from heroin addiction himself, Mr. Jim Germano.
Welcome to the Advocates, Mr. Germano.
Mr. Germano was for 9 years a heroin addict, and having beaten the habit, he has founded and become executive director of Marathon House and is a prominent fighter in the field against addiction. Mr. Germano, why do you favor involuntary commitment?
Well, for 2 reasons. One, my own personal experience, 9 years of using drugs and experience in 34 voluntary programs.
You tried 34 voluntary programs
unsuccessfully,
for yourself.
right?
Unsuccessfully.
And at the point in my life when I wound up in court and was pretty much pressured into a program, this was the turning point in my life. And two, because of the programs that I've been affiliated with for the last 8 years, the drug treatment programs, it seems that the people who apply themselves and do well in the programs and are considered successes are the people who have to be there. The volunteers never work out.
Who were involuntarily committed, in effect, to Marathon House. And that is done how? How is some person come to be these days involuntarily committed to one of your programs?
Well, primarily 88% of the people in our program come through some kind of court action, whether it be a parole stipulation, probation stipulation, or whatever. Then some people are involuntarily committed not through a court process, but through some other kind of external pressure that to them is very important.
It always takes some external pressure, in other
Right.
words. Tell me, what, just in terms of the cost to you, so we can compare that perhaps to the cost to the society, how much did the heroin habit cost you, and how did you pay for it?
Well, at the peak of my career, I was spending about $1.50, $150 a day, and I was a crook.
$150 a day. It didn't always amount to that.
No, it averaged out a lot lower, I suppose.
I suppose that's the explanation of the dilemma that so puzzled Mr. Cole. We were talking about maximum figures and what might be called an average figure, which was still very high, and you paid for that how?
By being a thief.
By being a thief. Tell me, what about the contention, which I suspect we may hear from some of Mr. Cole's witnesses, that the only way to kick a drug habit is the voluntary way, that no other way is really going to work?
Well, I think that's a lot of crap, actually. I think it's a nice liberal point of view, and you can be really popular if you want to expound that particular point of view. But I think if you check into any of the successful programs that operate around the country, you'll find that any clinician is apt to say that the type of people that do well in that program are the people who have to be there for one reason or another. And that doesn't mean mental health reasons being there.
Yes.
I agree that in the long run, it takes a certain self-interest, the person's own interest in being healthy that will accomplish his rehabilitation. But initially, to keep him in there, exposed to the program for the prescribed length of time, there has to be something outside of him keeping him there.
Mr. Cole, on that earthy note, I'd like to ask some questions.
Thank you,
of
sir.
Mr. Germano.
Mr. Germano, you are the executive director and a founding spirit, really, behind Marathon House. Very then qualified to tell us exactly how it operates. Would you very briefly do that, sir?
Well, Marathon House basically is a self-help program. Therapeutic community is a technical term.
Self-help. Are there
Yes.
locks on the doors of Marathon House?
No, there aren't.
So isn't it so that if a man wants to leave Marathon House, he can do so?
Yes, you can.
What happens to him then in the case of an involuntary commitment to Marathon House?
We'll notify the court, and chances are he'll be picked up on a capias, which is a warrant for his arrest, and he will be advised to return to the program more often than not. If not, he may be incarcerated if he's prosecuted as a criminal or any other situation that might exist. It's hard to say. You're dealing with a lot of different individuals.
Suppose that some of the money in Congressman Frey's bill could come your way to Marathon House if you would agree to put locks on the doors of Marathon House and accept in there persons who had been involuntarily committed, although not guilty of any crime. Would you do that?
No, we wouldn't, because we have found that it takes a certain kind of physical setting in order to rehabilitate people. The program, the buildings have to be conducive to a family-like atmosphere, a certain kind of intimacy. Institutions are not what we're looking for. I'm not certain what the outline of Congressman Frey's bill is, but it seems to me in our earlier conversations what we're talking about are pretty much community-based programs like Marathon House, the way it is now.
Well, we're talking about commitment, which I take it implies at least the threat of if one does not keep up with the program in Marathon House, then one goes to a place such as Lexington or Fort Worth or a place like that.
Yeah.
Let's carry that a little further and suppose that an individual has taken your program and has flunked it, as it were, and then gets thrown into Lexington or Fort Worth. What would you say the chances of his succeeding are?
Well, a lot less than they would be at Marathon House, that's for sure, but of course I'm biased. I think that it may be a possibility for him to gain something out of a program that Lexington or Fort Worth may offer, especially if he believes that he has to.
But the essence, again, of your program is those two words?
Self-help.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Germano. Mr. Usher?
In conclusion on this part of my case, let me simply stress again the point. Mr. Cole is under a profound misapprehension that commitment, involuntary commitment, necessarily means somehow confinement, jails, locks, bars. It doesn't. It means that the addict is required to participate in a particular program of treatment. But he will not be confined unless it has been determined, not only after diagnosis, but after judicial procedures, after the right to counsel, after a jury trial, if he insists upon it. He will not be confined.
Thank you, Mr. Usher. We'll be back to you later for your rebuttal case, but now let's hear from Mr. Cole and why Congress should not enact a national involuntary civil commitment program for drug addicts.
Well, I hardly feel the need to say very much after Mr. Usher has made my case for me. He just said that after a trial to determine that an individual is an addict, he will in fact be confined. Now, to call confinement, which does have a connotation about it of bars and guards and locks, commitment, it seems to me is merely to add insult to the injury. I mean, the language means what the language means. The proponents of this measure raise a specter of 250,000 or more addicts roaming our streets. Now, because law enforcement agencies come in contact only with criminal addicts, it doesn't mean that all addicts are necessarily engaged in some form of criminal activity. Addiction itself is not a crime. Even Mr. Frey's bill admits that. He talks about involuntary commitment of non-criminal addicts. Now, he wants to lock them up, but he says that once they are locked up, they will be treated. Well, we must, of course, look at the past to determine what happens when one is treated in a locked-up situation. The statistics from Lexington, from Fort Worth, from all of the other narcotics institutions which have locks as their basic premise are not only not very satisfying, they are profoundly disturbing, as we shall hear first of all from my first witness, Mr. Neil Chayette.
Welcome to the Advocates, Mr. Chayette.
Mr. Chayette, you have written widely on this subject. You were a delegate to the United Nations Psychotropic Drug Conference. You are on the staff of Mass General dealing in this general area. Let's talk first, though, with you as a lawyer, as a former professor of law, a little bit of legal philosophy. Why do we have a criminal law? Why do we lock people up?
We lock people up, Jack, essentially because they have committed an act which is antisocial and we know is harmful to society, in which there is a clearly defined code which says they must not commit that act. And we do so after we've made sure they've committed it, beyond a reasonable doubt, and give them as many procedural safeguards as we can. And that is basically how we function with the criminal law.
Well, there may be an area of unclarity with reference to a lot of people who don't understand the intricacies of the law and don't understand that addiction itself is not a crime, although a number of things that are necessary to become an addict, possession of heroin, are crimes. How do you explain that, sir?
Well, addiction is really a state of being, and from time immemorial, really, our system does not punish and must not punish people for what they are, but for what they do. It is the act which these people commit which we are most concerned about. And addiction is much more of a state of being, a status, rather than an act, and I think we have to always remember this as we discuss this issue tonight.
Is there a high correlation between addiction to narcotics and crime?
I know of no evidence which shows that there is a high correlation. I know of a great deal of speculation. I know of a great deal of supposition. But I know of no evidence that shows that there is a definite relationship between crime and the addict.
Well, let's assume that speculation is valid, just for the sake of this discussion. And let's go a little bit beyond it. Would you think, as a lawyer, that a program under which we could statistically be relatively more sure than not that an identifiable segment of the population was likely to commit crimes against property and against persons, if we could show that, would it be a good idea for us to round all those people up in advance and put them away for a period of, well, as I asked Congressman Frey, pre-correction? Would that be good?
I think this would lead to a very dangerous situation, that if you isolated a certain group of people and said that such a group of people is liable to commit crimes and treated them as a wholesale group, then I think that you lead to a great many inconsistencies and a great many dangers to what is really most fundamental, and that is our right to liberty. And that is the thing which we have always valued, and I hope still value, in this country, regardless of fears and crazes and so forth. I think it's the right to liberty which is most important, and I think that unless we can be sure that an individual is going to commit an act, the nature of which is so harmful, and he is so imminently dangerous to society, I think we must not get involved in preventive detention of any kind or in compulsory confinement or treatment or altering a person's way of life. This is most important.
Mr. Chayette, one final question, sir. Do you see any distinction between that kind of a procedure and a procedure in which we determine, for example, that all persons with red hair or blue eyes or black skin were more prone to certain kinds of crimes, and so we locked them up because of that statistical probability? Is there a distinction there?
I see very little distinction, Mr. Cole.
Mr. Chayette, thank you very much.
Chayette, before Mr. Rusher comes on, I'd like to ask you a question, because it seems to me the line is pretty thin here. Since an addict, by definition, has to possess the stuff in order to put it into him, hasn't he almost of a certainty committed a crime in order to reach the condition that you and Mr. Cole have been discussing?
Well, we have to be very careful, Mr. Dukakis, to realize that I think we're laying a false premise. I mean, we could say that an individual who is addicted to coffee, if we made coffee illegal, then we'd have a lot of very similar problems. We'd have people who have come into a situation because of the making a given substance illegal. And I think this is something that we have to keep in mind, that we have created a situation, and we continually come back not against the society which has spawned this, but more and more against the individual. We can stamp it out if we commit the individual. We have to change the individual, change his life, lock him up, don't lock him up, it doesn't matter. The key here is that this is a societal problem which has to be dealt with in a way which looks outward at society, not just inward at the one unfortunate person, the victim.
All right, let's let Mr. Rusher ask you a few questions.
Mr. Chet, I must learn never to be surprised at testimony. You know of no correlation between crime and heroin addiction?
I said, Mr. Rusher, that I know of many suppositions, I know of many speculations. I know of no definitive study which has shown a correlation between crime and addiction.
Definitive study. You said, I think, actually, the transcript would show that you said you knew of no evidence. You heard Mr. Germano's testimony that he himself supported his habit by stealing. Now, that is some evidence, is it not?
That is some evidence. When I speak
Is it an unusual case, in your opinion?
I would say, Mr. Rusher, that there is ground for speculation that an individual may steal if he is an addict. I'm not saying that there is evidence that persons have stolen or that there is tremendous relationship between crime, but I will concede to you this point that an individual may steal if he has to support a $100 a day habit, and now I'll let you take me on the next step.
That is awfully big of you, yes. Tell me, would you consider, as Mr. Cole does, that involuntary commitment equals confinement?
I would consider that confinement is one portion, one factor of the situation.
But it doesn't by any means necessarily get involved in the case of an involuntary commitment. You could have an involuntary commitment without any locks, without any bars, without any prohibition against a person's travel anywhere.
You could, but it must be remembered. May I
Surely.
complete my
Please.
answer, sir? Thank you. You could, but you always do have the specter of that ultimate weapon, and that is of confinement, and you are also interfering to a tremendous degree with the lifestyle and with the life of an individual. I think we have to keep that in mind.
The present New York and California law, as you are aware, does provide for involuntary commitment.
I am aware of that.
Would you repeal those provisions?
I would.
And turn loose all of the people now involuntarily committed unless they have actually been convicted of crime?
When you say turn loose, are you implying that all of them are under confinement, Mr. Rusher?
I'm talking about involuntary commitment.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, now that it's clarified, why don't you answer the question?
The question is, yes, Mr. Rusher, I would turn them loose.
All
that
loose.
is
That's
correct.
What
I would turn them loose unless I could be...
prove that they've committed a crime.
That is correct,
right.
Mr. Rusher.
Now, you have not, in point of fact, however, aside from your testimony tonight, always opposed all involuntary commitment of non-criminal addicts, have you?
I have always opposed commitment of non-criminal addicts for the reason of addiction alone.
Yes, but with other things involved, you're perfectly willing to have involuntary commitment, aren't you?
What do you mean by other things involved?
I'm about to quote your own testimony before the House Commerce Committee in July of this year. You said that the only people we should hospitalize inpatient, that is to say, as Mr. Cole would say, behind bars and with locks and things like that, against their will, that is, take away their liberty. The only ones we should do this to are those who are in imminent physical danger of either killing themselves or someone else, or destroying property, or that type of test. You provided, I'm reading the transcript of your...
that is quite accurate and quite different from everything I've said tonight.
It certainly is. I was wondering if
No, I think I would like to respond to that.
Please
That
do.
it would be a similar criterion for the commitment of a mentally ill individual. That is an individual who is about to commit, and there is a high predictability that is going to commit a certain act which is extremely dangerous to himself or to society. That is very different than making just the status or being an addict. That is extremely different from that situation which is contemplated by the Frey bill.
If I tell you that in New York State, where I come from, the life expectancy of a heroin addict is 29 years, would you consider that heroin addiction puts him in danger of destroying his life?
I would not call that the kind of imminent destruction which I have in mind.
And would you say that there is danger to the property of other people from such a person trying to support his habit?
I would call the predictability of that danger very difficult to assume indeed. And I think that we cannot make that leap, that because the general statistics of life expectancy or the general suppositions or speculation regarding stealing of property, I don't think we can translate that into saying because an individual is an addict that we can then hospitalize him against his will.
Even though the life expectancy is 29.
Even though the life expectancy is 29.
On that note, gentlemen, we're going to have to end your testimony. Thank you very much, Mr. Chayet, for being here. Mr. Cole.
And I must thank my distinguished colleague, Mr. Rusher, for pointing out to me that Mr. Chayet is indeed a very distinguished prodigal son, and we're happy to have him back on the side of justice. My next witness, excuse me, I think I'm standing in the wrong place, is Mr. Pleasant Harris, who was, for some 17 years, a heroin addict, and who now is on methadone maintenance, and who now is helping others by methadone maintenance and other treatments to get off of heroin.
Welcome to the Advocate, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Harris, why and how did you get off heroin?
Well, I was able to come off through the use of methadone maintenance with the Beth Israel program in New York City.
Why, though, did you do it?
I found that there was a terrific need that I had to change the way that I had been living. And this came through to me through the kinds of things that were happening with my family, with my employment, and not being able to really relate to the everyday situations that occurred.
Would you say that this sort of happened within you?
It took a period of 17 years for it to happen, but it did happen, yes.
Would you agree with Jimmy Germano that self-help is really the essence of how you came around?
Well, things were a little different, you know, when I first started using drugs. You didn't have the kinds of programs that you have now. But I don't think it would have been any different if I had been forced into some kind of treatment facility when I wasn't ready to be there. A person must be ready themselves as far as recognizing what their needs are and trying to deal with it. And I would think that we would try to set up more varied programs so that this individual would have a choice of which program he wishes to go into.
You've heard that Congressman Frey wants to commit, which includes at the very least the threat of confinement and very probably actual confinement, addicts to a place and treat them there. Do you think that would work?
Well, it's rather hard to realize that the government would spend over $100 million to place a person or to confine someone involuntarily with there not being locked doors. He can walk in and walk right out, and most likely he will do so. We found that in New York State, the involuntary commitment program has really not succeeded to the expectations of the people who first planned it.
It has succeeded to some degree, has it not? I mean, there are involuntarily committed addicts for whom that has been of some help?
Well, you'll find a minimal number who have come through this form of treatment. You might say who were forced into this kind of treatment, that it did help. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the money spent, that what was received for the money spent would more or less recommend that further use of that particular treatment approach.
Mr. Harris, most of us are just concerned with this tonight, but for you it's a way of life. So let me ask you, sir, if you had the kind of money that is written into Congressman Frey's bill, hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on the solution of the drug addiction problem in the United States, how would you spend it?
It's better be a quick answer.
One of the things I would try to do first is to set up outside evaluating agencies to more or less try to determine what the programs are doing and how they are intending to do it. This, I think, would form a basis, really, for more funds being given to the more successful kinds of programs. But I also would think that these monies would also be better spent to be used in the educational aspect and also to improve, to a great extent, on the now ongoing programs, such as methadone maintenance, who are, in effect, treating...
Let me break in at this point, and Mr. Rusher will pick it up from here.
Mr. Harris, back to this, I think, rather important point. In your experience, is heroin addiction related to crime?
You might say this, that those who are addicted do find that a crime does allow them to maintain their habit. There are many, but on the other hand, there are many addicts, and we have as many different types of addicts as you have non-addicts, who do not resort to crime, especially violent crimes,
now, I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about all types of crimes, prostitution, passing bad checks, the whole bit. How many addicts would you say resort at one time or another to crime? What percentage in order to support their habit?
It's rather difficult to say, because then you would have to break down exactly what you mean by certain crimes.
I don't think so. I say resort to any type of crime. Would you give me just an educated guess? You've had much more experience with this than I.
I would say over 50%.
Over 50%, certainly. And the fact is, I think we will find the figure, at least the studies we've had, is much higher yet. But isn't it a fact that I believe you did say, if I understood you correctly, that either the threat of incarceration of some type or of involuntary commitment, depending on what particular type of program a given state has, does work in certain cases. It provides an external motivation. I took it you meant not in many cases, but in some.
In our society, once they expend certain funds or extend certain funds, they wish to reap benefits from these sums. And what I'm saying is that the people who would be helped by involuntary commitment are so few as to negate the possibilities of more funds coming into play.
Tell me this, if a heroin addict should, by some mischance, commit a crime, should his prison sentence, if he is convicted, include compulsory treatment for his addiction, in your opinion?
No, because we're still stating that the individual is being forced into some form of treatment. Yeah. And this has been shown right down through the years that this form of treatment does not work.
And yet, and this is I guess the essential point that Mr. Germano was making that I would like to have your opinion on. Mr. Germano seemed to me to be saying that very frequently a heroin addict needs to start with some external pressure, some external inducement, some external coercion. Then, when the treatment is underway, it is possible, hopefully, for him to develop the desire, which he may not have or may not be able to formulate right off the bat, to help himself. It is true.
No, this is not true.
This doesn't work at all.
No, because it really goes back to understanding the addict. And many people feel as if they have the answer that the addict does not know what might be good for him due to the fact that he has become addicted.
You feel he does?
To a great extent, yes, he does. And I would like to see more programs being made available, let's say such as methadone maintenance.
May
I finish, please?
Sure.
Where you wouldn't have the kinds of waiting lists that you now have for treatment, where people could be treated in a very humane way and as fast as possible.
You are on methadone maintenance yourself, and you use it in place of heroin, is that right?
I don't use it in place of heroin.
You use it in any case?
I am taking a medication, yes.
And would you stop it if you could?
I'm on the way to doing that right now.
You are stopping it now. Why haven't you stopped so far?
Because there is a period of time for detoxification.
So there is a matter of motivation that has to be present here.
Well, motivation along with the change of lifestyle, which brings that about.
Mr. Harris, I'm afraid I'll have to break in. Thank you very much for being with us in the Advocates this evening. Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Harris really said it all. What we need is the kind of money the Congressman is talking about, and perhaps a great deal more, for more programs of the kind he's on, the marathon program, many kinds of programs. A man very well qualified, it seems to me, to tell us about those programs and what might be done is Dr. Matthew Dumont, who is the director of the Massachusetts Drug Rehabilitation Program.
Welcome to the Advocates, Dr. Dumont.
Dr. Dumont, I think it's fair to say that there is, in the public mind, a stereotype of the narcotics addict as a violence-prone criminal. I wonder if you'd comment on that, sir.
Yes, it's a very unfortunate stereotype, and it's gotten in the way of our desperate efforts to try to do something about the problem. There's no justification for it. In fact, there's no such thing as the addictive personality. There's no indication that the addict is any more prone to anybody else to violence or indeed to criminal behavior of any kind.
Well, what about when he injects heroin into his person? Does the drug do something to him that turns him into some kind of a violence-prone person?
Well, quite the reverse. As a matter of fact, a person who has just shut up is a rather congenial and comfortable man who is not at all dangerous.
What about Congressman Frey's idea of involuntary civil, if you will, commitment for narcotics addiction? Why isn't that, and I take it you don't believe it is, a good approach to the problem?
It isn't, because while he insists on the distinction between involuntary commitment and a locked institution, the experience over the centuries with involuntary civil commitments of all kinds is that they invariably lead to the locked institution. This is true of involuntary civil commitments for mental illness. There isn't a mental hospital in the country that accepts involuntary commitments that is not locked. It is a condition of an involuntary commitment by the nature of the beast. Now, the experience with the involuntary civil commitments for addicts in this country, with the federal centers in Fort Worth and Lexington, and in the programs in New York and California have, by broad consensus, although you can't get any agreement among social scientists as not among lawyers, by broad consensus is that they have been a failure.
Dr. Dumont, As director of this state's program, you are familiar, I take it, with the problem on a nationwide basis. Is it not so, sir, that there are waiting lists now, sometimes of up to a year and even beyond, for persons who want to get in on a voluntary basis?
There are indeed. There are waiting lists for every program in the Commonwealth. There is a particularly long waiting list for Mr. Germano's excellent program, and I would say that indeed the component of Mr. Frey's bill to increase the resources available to these programs is very precious and long sought after.
But you would
want, let me interrupt and say that after the program's over, perhaps you and Congressman Frey can get together and see if there isn't some money for those kinds of programs. Mr. Rusher, it's time now for some questions.
Dr. Dumont, I'm curious to know whether you agree with Mr. Harris that over 50% of addicts finance their habit by crime, or whether you agree with Mr. Chayet that there is no definitive evidence of a correlation between addiction and crime, or perhaps with both.
Well, I don't know. I must say that. We have no way of knowing what the relationship between addiction and crime is because there's an awful lot of sloppy thinking about what addiction is. Everybody who uses heroin is considered an addict. This is not
Mr. Harris didn't have any trouble understanding the question. He said over 50% of addicts supported the habit by crime, and I think the figure's low on the basis of my own witness's testimony.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to say I don't know what the figure is, but we have no way of knowing at this
Tell
point.
me, do you favor, you are a psychiatrist, I understand, do you favor incarcerating mental patients?
Under very special circumstances, and then with great deliberation and conflict.
You think too many of them are at the moment under incarceration of one type?
Absolutely.
And how about the legalization of drugs? Do you favor that?
I don't understand why you're asking that. Is that relevant to this issue?
I think it is. It rather tends to show us your habits of mind. And Mr. Chayet, you'll recall, he wanted to repeal the laws of New York and California on this subject. You want to release all but a very few of the mental patients incarcerated. Now, where do you stand on the legalization of drugs?
Well, the habits of my mind might be delved more effectively with other kinds of questions.
Well, suppose you leave that to me.
Mr. Rusher, I think we can't get on to the legalization of drugs tonight. Let's see if we can
Shall we
stick with
treat that as a plea
involuntary
of the Fifth Amendment and go on?
All right. We'll try another program on that issue.
You approve of the marathon program of Mr. Germano?
Indeed, it's licensed by my division and supported.
And in point of fact, you heard Mr. Germano testify that his is a de facto involuntary commitment program.
I don't think that's the word that he used, and as a matter of fact, we have some disagreement.
Which is not the word he used?
De facto involuntary commitment.
He certainly used the word involuntary commitment. He may not
I
have
believe
said
he used
de
that
facto.
word, yes. But in fact, it is not an involuntary
You
commitment.
disagree with him about about the nature of the program that he founded and of which he is the executive director?
Because the people committed to his program come from my division.
Mm-hmm.
And they are committed under a law that is very specifically and carefully a voluntary commitment law. That patient does have the right to leave. He does have the right to take his chances with a criminal proceeding, and frequently do. He is not involuntarily committed. The option is there. It remains and always will remain in the
Mr.
state.
Germano, regarding it as in effect, an involuntary commitment is simply wrong.
Well, what Mr. Germano is saying, that when there is a threat of some kind of sanction when the patient leaves his program, there is a greater motivation to stay at the outset. And those patients who stay in Marathon House longer tend to be more successful, and there's no question about that.
Dr. Dumont, in those cases, isn't the club of incarceration as a criminal really being held over the head of these people? And in that sense, really isn't the commitment to Marathon House rather involuntary?
Well, but in fact, there is a waiting list for patients voluntarily anxious to get into that program, and that's a very painful scene in the state.
You admit that many addicts, I assume you would admit, that many addicts turn to nonviolent crime. I think that distinction's been made here, as distinguished from violent types of crime in order to finance their habit.
Well, the distinction should have been made if it hasn't, yes.
Crimes
are unlikely.
Does that, in your opinion, sort of mitigate the situation?
I don't know what you mean.
I mean, is burglary good? Does it matter?
No, nothing is good.
Prostitution? Bum checks? Why is the fact that a crime that is committed by a heroin addict nonviolent something that we must all consider as a reason for not doing anything?
Well, I will repeat what I said. There is no good, hard evidence that there is a high correlation between addiction and nonviolent crime.
None except Mr. Harris's tonight, at any rate.
Well, Mr. Harris and I hope are entitled to disagree at times.
I hope you are, too, and I hope you both disagree with Mr. Cole. Tell me,
Mr.
would
Rusher,
you...
I'm going to have to break in at this time on that note. Thank you very much, Dr. Dumont.
Thank you.
Mr. Cole?
You have heard Dr. Dumont say that there is a waiting list for persons who are trying to get into programs which are now available for those who want to cure themselves. You've heard Mr. Germano say, you've heard Mr. Harris say that the essence is self-help. Why don't we take the money that Congressman Frey is talking about spending, hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe even more, maybe billions of dollars, that, after all, by the meanest estimates, is what this problem is costing us in this country, and make different kinds of solutions to this problem available until we find one. I submit, however, that we will not find one by committing or confining or incarcerating, whatever term you want to use. It means deprivation of liberty. It means being locked up, or at the very least, it means being someplace that one doesn't want necessarily to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. And now let's return to Mr. Rusher for his rebuttal argument in support of Congress's enacting a national program of involuntary civil commitment for drug addicts.
If Mr. Cole would only listen, it doesn't even mean that the addict need necessarily be where he doesn't want to be. This is not some visionary future program we are talking about. A program of this type exists in the state of California and is working very well. And for that purpose, I call as our next and final witness Mr. Roland Wood, the superintendent of the California Rehabilitation Center.
Welcome to the Advocates, Mr. Wood.
Mr. Wood, we've been wrestling around here, as you've probably heard, with this business that involuntary commitment is either confinement or a necessary threat of it and a violation of a non-criminal addict's civil liberties. How does it go out in California? Is this necessarily true?
That is not true. The California law does protect the civil rights of the individual. The due process is protected in that he is examined within 72 hours. He must then appear before the court, and the court or a jury must find that he is an addict and in danger to himself or to others before he is confined. This process does eliminate some people from commitment to the facility.
That is to say, they simply are not committed to the facility and are free to roam about without any restrictions whatever.
That's correct.
Well, now, how has this California program really worked? Are you getting anywhere with involuntary commitment?
We certainly are. Using our statistics for 1969 releases, we find that over 40% are still in the community at the end of one calendar year. Considering the fact that free of drugs, considering the fact that 82% of our men are committed to us following a conviction of a felony offense, and that only about 5% return the institution with a new felony commitment, I think this is a really an outstanding achievement.
82% were committed to you with a felony offense.
That's correct.
Certainly food for thought for Mr. Chayet if he begins to wonder about a correlation between heroin and crime. Tell me, but isn't the cost of your program great? Aren't the people of California paying a lot for this?
Our cost per individual is only $10 a day. And considering the fact that it costs somewhere between $250 to $300 to support himself by stealing, by prostitution, by writing checks in the community to support his habit, again, we feel that this is a wise investment of the state's funds.
To spare Mr. Cole confusion again, that isn't $250 or $300 that he has to spend on the habit, but that he has to steal in order through fences to realize the amount he needs to spend.
That is correct.
Well then, and lastly, sir, how essential is the involuntary aspect? Could you do this with strictly voluntary means?
No, it's absolutely essential to our program. That we found, and we've heard from Mr. Germano and others, that addicts will not stay in a program if it's not compulsory treatment. We find that these individuals must have their attention. We must get their attention, and then we can treat them in a non-punitive setting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole.
Mr. Wood, I wonder, sir, if you're familiar with the work of Professor John C. Kramer.
Yes, I am, very definitely.
Would you tell me the connection with his institution, He was
formerly the director of research in our institution.
You think he's a good man? Think he knows what he's talking about?
I think he has made some misstatements of facts and some wrong conclusions.
Well, let me throw a couple at you and let you have it back at him, sir.
Mr. Wood? No, he is not.
Okay.
Since its inception, I'm quoting from a Boston University Law Review article with which I'm sure you're familiar, sir. The program has been virtually indistinguishable in operation from a prison program. The physical facilities are prison-like, and the institution rules are prison rules. Psychiatrists and psychologists have played only the most peripheral part in the program. Would you comment, sir?
That is not correct. We're somewhere in between a prison and a mental hospital. We are not a prison, although we are under the Department of Corrections. And certainly there's a great difference between our facility and its program than a prison atmosphere.
Well, what are some of the differences, sir?
The differences are that we try to take an individual and help him to look at his his problem, and see what he can do to change his behavior so that he may live drug-free in the community. We have eliminated all the aspects of the criminal connotations in relationship to the Robinson decision, the famous decision of the Supreme Court.
You've eliminated all of the criminality aspects of your program, sir?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Are there no locks on the door of your
There are no
institution?
locks on our door, but an individual is required to stay in our program. It is compulsory treatment, and should he escape, then he's prosecuted for escape.
Doesn't that amount to the same thing to you, sir? Or is there something I'm missing by way of a distinction here?
Again, keeping in mind that these individuals, for the most part, 82% of them are felony commitments, and then are determined to be an addict, and then are committed to our institution. The balance are addicts and are required to undergo treatment. And by the Robinson decision, keeping an individual under treatment in a therapeutic atmosphere is constitutional.
Well, more power to you, Mr. Wood, insofar as your treatment of persons convicted of felonies who have drug-related backgrounds. But we're not talking about them here tonight, sir. We're talking about persons who are not convicted nor indeed charged with any criminal activity whatever. How many of those in your institution have walked out cured?
About four people out of 10 will stay drug-free 1 calendar year after release. And if you take it for a longer period of time, at least 59% of them will be able to spend at least 1 full year in the community drug-free and crime-free.
Mr. Wood, let me interject at this point. Are these people who are not charged with crime or threatened with criminal proceedings before they came to you, or were they facing some kind of criminal proceeding?
Approximately 10 to 11% of our individuals are in the institution not charged with a criminal offense. They do go through the court processes and are committed to us, and after they are committed, it is no longer voluntary.
The vast majority, I take it, face jail as criminals unless they go with you. Is that correct?
The vast majority of this group would not until they did commit a crime in order to support their habit. About 5% of this group are truly volunteers. When the legislature changed the law to make a smaller, shorter period of confinement for the truly voluntaries, we did not get a flock of volunteers into the program.
Cool.
Mr. Wood, let's confine our questioning now to the area of those who have succeeded in graduating, as it were, from the program of involuntary civil commitment in California. And again, quoting from Dr. Kramer's work, we have found that a large proportion of those who succeed are not typical of the majority of the addict population. They are individuals who have had little or no contact with opiates, or were mainly users of opiate-containing syrup or tablets. This suggests that the likelihood of success for those individuals for whom the program was primarily intended, the heroin addicts, is even more remote than the statistics suggest.
That's absolutely incorrect, and all of our people are found to be using hard narcotics, or they wouldn't be into the institution. The law provides that they must be convicted, they must be adjudicated as being addicted to hard narcotics, morphine derivatives, before they are committed to us, and that is an absolutely incorrect statement.
Does involuntary commitment always work? Sometimes? Most of the time? How would you characterize it?
We have followed our men and women. Today we have 2,000 in the institution and 6,000 out in the community. As previously indicated, we find that 40% of these individuals are still in the community 1 year later. Some people do have to come back to the institution for a short period of inpatient care again. This is generally around 60 or 90 days.
So that your success ratio after only 1 year is 40%. So that you're locking up 60% and it doesn't work.
They may have to return to the institution for an additional period of treatment, but that does not necessarily mean they're a failure. You're equating return to the institution as failure, which is not correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wood, for being with us. Mr. Rucker?
Despite his persistence in the rhetoric, I really do think that Mr. Cole has come to believe that Mr. Frey's bill is not simply a matter of locking up all the drug addicts and heroin addicts in America. It is a much more sophisticated, much more thoughtful, and much more humane program than that. And it will, if we pass it, if we support it, if we care, go far toward solving, if anything can, the problem of serious drug addiction in this country.
Thank you, gentlemen. That completes the cases, and now each of our advocates has 1 minute in which to summarize his case. Mr. Rusher, you're first.
As a conservative, I have dedicated my life to defending men's freedom, but I have never heard the great cause of freedom more royally abused than it has been tonight. In the name of freedom, we have been told that people whose will has been absolutely destroyed by drugs must be allowed to go on choosing suicide. In the name of freedom, we have been told that the rest of us must sit idly by until the fast-rising tide of drug addiction has resulted in the commission of a specific felony against us or our family or our neighbors. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that isn't what the government of this country was founded upon and what its founders understood by freedom. Either we are going to lick the drug problem, or it is going to lick us. Are you ready to back a serious national effort to control this awful pestilence? Or do you stand with those who, in the name of freedom, would do nothing or next to nothing until another million lives have been ruined forever and crime has become so common in America that even the criminals begin to complain?
Thank you, Mr. Rusher. Mr. Cole, you also have 1 minute to summarize your case.
Thank you, sir. I don't think that Mr. Rusher was addressing those questions to me, but let me answer them anyway. Yes, I am ready to undertake a serious effort. I think we must to solve the drug problem, but I am struck by a paradox here. The drug addict takes drugs, it seems to me at least, in order to escape from reality, from a world, for the most part, that he never made. Well, we're very rightly concerned about that in this society, both for his benefit and for the benefit of those whom he might harm in order to raise money to support his very expensive drug habit. No question about that. But is the answer to that for us to escape too? To escape into a world of unreality, a world of pretense that there exists a medical treatment for something which we know statistically simply does not lend itself to medical treatment. It lends itself very much to the kind of treatment that cures alcoholism. The individual must, from within himself, decides that he wants to change his lifestyle. Self-help is the operative word, voluntarism, and I submit that all of the hundreds of millions of dollars that Congressman Frey wants to spend can be best spent developing programs of that kind.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now it's time for you at home to act, to express your views on tonight's question. Write us, The Advocates, Box 1971, Boston 02134. What do you think? The question on which you'll be voting: should Congress enact a national involuntary commitment program for drug addicts? Send us your yes or no vote on a letter or postcard. We will tabulate your views and make them known to the White House, to members of Congress, and to other persons concerned with this issue. Every one of your votes is important. So remember that address, The Advocates, Box 1971, Boston 02134. Recently, the Advocates debated the question, should television news be exempt from the Fairness Doctrine? Here is how our viewers responded to that question.
Of the more than 4,000 viewers across the country who sent us their votes, 1,078, or 26%, were in favor of the proposal, and 2,982, or 73%, were opposed.
And now, let's look ahead to next week.
The Constitution clearly states that only Congress shall have the power to declare war. Yet 60 times in the last century, American presidents, without prior congressional authorization, have committed U.S. troops to combat. Some argue that if we are to prevent future wars by presidential initiative, Congress must limit the president's power as commander-in-chief. A question next time for The Advocates.
Thanks to our advocates and to our witnesses. I'm Michael Dukakis. Please join us again at the same time next week. Thank you and good night.
The Advocates as a program takes no position on the issue debated tonight. Our job is to help you understand both sides more clearly. This program was recorded.